And the extraordinary mathematical connections between the moon, the earth, and the sun, and their conclusion, with evidence, was that the moon had to be some kind of construct. And I'd thought about this in the past every now and again, but then it was just fleeting and you got on with your life. But now it was time to focus on this. And the bits and the puzzle pieces came in, and I put this thing together. And I didn't realize that until I started doing that two Russian scientists from the Soviet Academy of Scientists in 1970 wrote a detailed article basically asking the question, is the moon some form of extraterrestrial spacecraft? And again, the longer we talk, the more everything kind of connects to everything else. I mentioned earlier that one of the greatest ways of suppressing human perception is to suppress the perception of the possible. And if we're going to understand what's happening to us, we have got to redefine our perception of what is technologically possible, and what is possible in terms of holographic projection, which can project things in ways that look absolutely solid and real. I mean, you can interact with them in that way, come to that. And because of the suppression of our sense of the possible, things like the moon not being a natural body is, like, to most people, it's ridiculous, because they can't conceive that it's possible. But we, because of the suppression, have been living in the technological Stone Age. And thus, what's happening around us, which is technologically massively more advanced than we think is possible, is happening without people questioning it, because we couldn't perceive there's anything to question. It's got to be real. And I say this, imagine back in the Stone Age, when there's this guy sitting there and he's knocking rocks together, and another guy comes over to him in the Stone Age, points to the moon and says, it's possible to build something that flies like a bird right up to that moon, and he's knocking rocks together. That's his perception of the possible. So the idea that is possible, ludicrous, you've been on the mammoth juice, right? But even though to Stone Age people that was impossible, clearly it is possible, but only when you know how. And thus, when people look at the moon, and I think other bodies too, and they say that no one could have constructed that, or at least hollowed out some natural type body and if you like, reconstructed it, they can't think it's possible, but it is. And when you look at the moon and you look at the anomalies, it's quite clear that it's not a natural body. It's either a completely unnatural body, or it has been, as these Russian scientists postulated, it's somehow some kind of hollowed out planetoid. I mean, look at it. Look at the size of the Earth and look at the size of the moon. It's massive. It shouldn't be there. And there are tribes that are still in existence that talk about the fact that their tribe goes back so far that it was before the moon was in the sky. And it's a thing that we, again, when we come out of the womb into this world, we tend to accept that what's here has always been here. But it isn't. I mean, I go into this in Remember Who You Are in some detail. Even the solar system that we see now has not been like that for that long in geological terms. And then when you, and I go into this in the book as well, because of an experience I had as a kid, then we can ask another question. Again, we're coming back to this blank sheet of paper. Is what we see out there, is it really there? Or is it some kind of holographic projection that we are decoding? Because we are taking waveform information, vibrational information fields, and we're decoding them into holographic reality. Therefore, we look into the great beyond and we see this vastness of space and the stars, all that time away. But the only place they exist in that holographic so-called physical state that we're perceiving is in our decoding system. So there is actually the distances we perceive that everything is apart from everything else is merely that which we are decoding to be like that. So is it really there, or is it a projection? These are the things that we need to start asking and questioning on the blank sheet of paper, because all bets are off. You see, I tell this story in the new book. I was brought up in a place called Leicester in the Midlands of England. I think, let's say we didn't have much money. I was brought up in the 50s and the early 60s as a kid, and most of the 60s. We were, I remember going around the back of the factory where my father worked with my mother on a Thursday lunchtime, so he could hand that week's wage packet to her so we could eat that night. That's how hand to mouth it was. So we didn't go places. We rarely went on holiday. When we did, we came to the Isle of Wight, which is why I fell in love with it and why I'm here now. But one day, out of the blue, my father, I was a little kid, it must have been about late 50s, maybe 58, 59. And he announces we're going to London on the train, the whole family. And it's like, we don't do that. But we went, and I can still see it now. I can see this picture of all these legs, this vast crowd of people trying to get a ticket on the train. Going on a steam train, I went to London. Now, in my entire knowledge of my father, he never once mentioned the word astronomy or talked about the heavens in any way, shape or form. We get to London and he takes us to the planetarium, right? I didn't know what a planetarium was. It was next to Madame Tussauds in Baker Street, which is, it's not there, the building's there now, but it's not a planetarium anymore, I understand. So I go into this planetarium. It's all kind of new, because we're talking late 50s, and the London Planetarium, which we went to, actually opened in 58, so maybe that's why we went, because it was so new. Anyway, I'm sitting there, a little kid, if it was 58, 59, I'd be, 6 or 7. And I'm looking around thinking, what's going to happen? And there's this contraption in there, and this darkness in the sky, and then the show starts. And it's midday, it must have been midday, something like that. And suddenly, I'm sitting there, and the night sky is above my head. And the stars were moving. And the stars looked like they looked when I look up as a kid at night. And there are times in your life when something hits you. It really smacks you and you don't forget it. That was one of my moments. It impacted that moment when I saw the heavens on that dome ceiling of the London Planetarium in the late 50s. It imprinted something on me, which I've never forgotten. And the last couple of years I was out in the countryside, about 2 or 3 miles from here, just sitting on a bench, and I just looked up. And when I looked up, it was daytime. I saw the sky as a gigantic dome, and I thought, is this real? Is this a projection? Like the planetarium, it came back to me. That story came back to me when I had that experience. And then a friend of mine, Neil Haig, who does artwork for my books, I was talking to him about this. He said, "Have you seen that movie, The Truman Show?" And I hadn't. It had been out a long time, but I got it on DVD when he mentioned it, and I watched it here. For people that haven't seen The Truman Show, it starred Jim Carrey, and he was born on the set of a soap program, but he didn't know that. So he's growing up thinking this is real in life, and his mother's his mother and his girlfriends, and they're all bloody actors. And every time he tries to get out of this little town, this set as it turned out to be, something stopped him. And he started to get, in the end, suspicious what's going on. And cut a long story short, eventually he gets on this boat, which he thinks is going out to the open ocean. And he goes out, and he goes out, and he goes out. And eventually he comes to the wall of this massive freaking dome, in which it's all been going on in. And then he walks up the edge of the dome and out the door of the dome into the world as it really is. And whoa, that hit me like a train when I watched that. I thought, that's it. Vibrationally, holographically, in terms of projections that we decode, that is our situation. And then, this soap show, the Truman Show, which everyone was watching, the only person didn't realize was him, that it was all a big act. The operations center, where it was all manipulated from, looked like the moon. And I think that whoever wrote the Truman Show got seriously bloody lucky, or had some idea what he was writing about symbolically. And I'm saying that Saturn is part of that process. That the way it seems to me is Saturn is the main projector of this fake reality. And then you look at Saturn and you say, anything's possible. What's real anymore? And the moon is amplifying that and focusing on the Earth particularly. So we get a much more amplified version of it. Therefore, much more powerful fake reality. And people talk about, insiders have talked about bases on the dark side of the moon that they've seen in pictures, and NASA, they talk about domes and buildings and strange non-natural artifacts or buildings and structures on the moon, not just on the far side, that's where most of them are, obviously. And isn't it funny, we only see one side of the moon. Hey, just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. But there are some you can point out on the near side of the moon as well. But I'm saying, so I have no problem that all that is correct. But I'm saying that it's inside the moon where the real deal is, and that's what the Russian scientists was saying in 1970, that it actually goes on inside the moon. That's where the whole thing comes from. And it was another kind of common theme through my life in the last 22 years, and the puzzle pieces being given to me, is that when I've gone public with something that's kind of bizarre and out there, something comes along that says, hey, see, you were right to go there. Look, hey, it's like a confirmation. And about 9 months after Human Race came out, I had an email from a lady in Brazil, I think it was. And she said, I read your book about the moon. Have you read a book called Earth by a lady called Barbara?